and I wrote 160 seasons of TV per year. And she was like, do you mean 160 episodes? I was like, no.
I sat down with Michel Ghanem, who you might know as TV Scholar. He's basically one of the leading TV experts on the planet at this point, and he watches an obscene amount of television. We get into the stuff he loves, and we just get to talk about queer representation on TV, which is obviously forever an important thing to discuss. I mean, I've been following your work online as TV Scholar for years now. You're responsible for a lot of things I've watched on television because I very much trust your recommendations. But I'm curious about sort of the origin story of TV Scholar and how you came to be so.
TV Scholar came out of grad school. I went to Toronto Metropolitan University, where I did a master's in fashion studies, where I was researching costume design on television. But I wanted a way to kind of disseminate what I was learning in school to a broader audience. And so I came up with this account, TV Scholar, where I started posting screenshots of TV shows I was watching. And yeah, so it sort of took off from there.
I mean, for me, television, since we're here in queer, television did play a really massive role in sort of my understanding of my own queerness, because it's like, as opposed to film, if you're growing up in a certain era, the 90s, film wasn't as accessible. I couldn't just watch it at home. So it was like, honestly, like shows like Roseanne, not to bring her up, but it was a really great show, or even The Simpsons with the episode that it had with John Waters. I'm curious what your first sort of queer TV looked like, and if that had any influence on how you formed your identity.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in a sci-fi household, so there was a lot of like Star Trek, Stargate, Battlestar Galactica, that kind of thing. It was really Avatar: The Last Airbender. That was the first show that I watched that had a serialized format, and where I went out to like buy the DVD so I could watch the whole season if I didn't catch it on TV. And I feel like that show really opened my eyes to serialized storytelling. And that sort of kicked off this interest in TV in general. But I would say queer characters were like, there weren't that many in terms of what I was watching. I feel like it wasn't until I started watching like clips of Queer as Folk on YouTube. I would like YouTube, like men kissing and Queer as Folk would pop up. And I feel like that was sort of my first exposure. And then sort of later on, like Glee came out. I found there was kind of a vacuum of queer representation in my youth in terms of what I was seeing in the shows that I was watching. It wasn't until sort of later that I started digging into TV and found shows like Please Like Me, or even Sex and the City. I think there's so much to say about Sanford and that character, but there was a part of me that did feel kind of seen through his character and his eyes, and there wasn't like a specific character. I actually once wrote a piece about how I feel like I saw my queer identity through a lot of the women protagonists that I was watching, because I loved, Grey's Anatomy and The Good Wife and all these these procedural dramas. And I feel like those are the characters I gravitated towards because I couldn't relate to the more heteronormative, portrayals of masculinity that were on TV. And so through all of those sort of pathways, I found my way here, where now, like, if a show doesn't have a queer character, I start panicking.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because I feel like, there's a lot that gets said about queer representation on television, often focusing on the bad, which there's many bad things to focus on. But I also feel like it's a pretty incredible time for queer TV. I'm just thinking of even just like Phantasma's last year, which was just to me like just an extraordinary show that I couldn't believe was being aired by HBO.
Yeah.
But what are your sort of thoughts on queer television right now, and what are some of your favorites, and where do you get hope from that?
That's a great question. Phantasmas was incredible. Like, talk about a show that didn't just focus on queer characters, but had like a queer sensibility to it. It portrayed like the systems in our culture and our society. The question I get asked most often about a show is it gay? Like, that's what people are always asking me when I post about something or write about a show. And I've sort of used that radar, I guess, or gaydar to navigate the TV landscape. And my life, like, I have so many queer people in my life. So of course I want to watch a show where there are queer people in it. And even if the protagonists aren't queer, like, that they have queer people around them. It's honestly hard to watch a show when there's nothing queer going on, because I'm like, this is so far removed from my life. But there are so many shows in the last couple of years that have just like really captured my attention. I mean, to the bigger like Emmy winning shows like Hacks, to smaller niche shows like CBC's Sort of. And I think as queer people, like we're always drawn to, I think, the niche and the specific and things that are outside of the mainstream experience. So I think many of us do watch things that don't get their flowers. Yeah, there's so many. I feel like every year my list gets longer and longer. And then at the same time, we're seeing this sort of like cultural backlash against queer people. And I'm sort of frightened, but cautiously optimistic that as queer people, we're going to be able to kind of make our way through and still have great queer TV to watch.
Yeah, because the landscape's just changing so quickly in ways that generally seem bad. But I mean, I'm still hopeful. I mean, like we're a year off of Somebody Somewhere, for example, a show that does have a straight protagonist, but feels like also like the queerest show of all time in so many ways. Like that gave me hope that HBO kept renewing it 3 times at least, and it got some Emmy nominations. And I don't know, there's enough going on to make me feel like we're going to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope that we get another, Pose and another Somebody Somewhere, and that these shows keep popping up. I feel like TV has so much power, not just to provide understanding and empathy to the general public about queerness, but for queer people ourselves to see ourselves represented and to feel seen and understood, and that we matter.
Yeah, but it's definitely like changed. Like I think of like growing up in the late 90s, it was genuinely just Ellen. In the 2000s, things changed really quickly, but now it's like there's dozens and dozens of shows representing a whole rainbow of LGBTQ identities, which is lovely.
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing that's missing for me, and I'm still waiting for, are more shows about like queer groups of friends. Like I feel like we had The L Word, we had Queer as Folk, we had Looking very briefly, and I still feel, I guess Heartstopper sort of fills that gap a little bit, but that's something that I'm still waiting to see and hope that sort of comes back.
Are you like a Looking defender, or are you, what are your thoughts on Looking?
I'm a Looking truther. I think people were so harsh on that show. I thought it was such a like empathetic and gentle way to depict queer life in San Francisco. It wasn't perfect, just like any show isn't perfect, but I related to it a lot and saw myself in some of those characters and wish it would have ran for another 5 seasons. Like, it's sad that it ended where it did.
I agree. I actually thought it was like a pretty great show for the most part. Like, yes, It did have some like flawed moments, but there's some incredible episodes. I'm just curious, like, how much TV do you watch?
I write a column for The Cut called Appointment Viewing, and I rewrote sort of the intro blurb this year, and I sent it to my editor, and I wrote 160 seasons of TV per year, and she was like, do you mean 160 episodes? I was like, no.
That is wild.
So I watch a lot of TV, and what I love about TV is it's such a broad medium. There's like a TV show for every occasion. Like, I have a TV show that I watch while I make my soup of the week, which is probably Grey's Anatomy. Like, I have like my broadcast shows that I watch while I'm folding laundry. And then I have shows that I'm just like locked in and just paying attention to, which is probably like the Sunday night, HBO show. And there's just, I don't know, to me, there's always like a show for every emotion, which I love. Folks who get overwhelmed by how much TV there is, or they go on Netflix and they say, oh, there's just so much, I'll never watch all of it. I've never felt that way, and I think I once heard a TV critic say that it's like walking into a library. You don't expect that you're going to read every single book on the shelf. You go and pick from the genres you like and recommendations, and that's sort of how I view TV. Like, I know I'm, one day when I pass away, I won't have watched everything, but hopefully I'll have watched, a lot.
And also, like, you don't need to watch the whole season. I said that some people just don't, like, it's like you can also stop reading a book. Like, if you don't like it, stop.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm kind of bad at that. I'm a bit of a completist. And it's funny, some of the shows that I did stop watching when I was in my teens, I regret not finishing, which is terrible, like True Blood and Gossip Girl. I never finished because I just got to those later seasons and I was like, I can't do it. I finally watched 6 Feet Under, which I was so sad that I hadn't seen it as a kid, just to see 2 adult gay men in a long-term relationship and showing them sort of over the years of their relationship. So love that show.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty deeply key to me, only because I did watch it as it was coming out. I watched it with my family, and our makeup is 2 brothers, then much younger sister. And my father hadn't just died, but they were getting divorced. So my mother watched it with us as like a cathartic thing. And I will never forget watching that final episode and all of us crying so hard that it was just like an experience I've never had again in terms of just like sitting in a room full of people who happen to be my siblings and mother crying over a pretty perfect series finale.
Probably one of the best series finales of all time, I would say.
Well, on that note, I just want to thank you so much for being here. This is lovely.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really fun. And if I have one last thing to say, which all of my followers know this about me, is that My Brilliant Friend, I think, is maybe my favorite show of all time. And everyone should check that out on HBO.
I have not started watching it yet, but I definitely have had it high top of mind because of you. Well, I'm going to take your photo. Oh, it's here. 3, 2, 1.